Some people lose a priceless treasure because of carelessness, but sometimes fate allows it to be found by the only person honest enough to give it back. A cold spring rain swept across the streets of Manhattan, washing the sidewalks in shimmering reflections while hurried strangers disappeared beneath umbrellas without noticing the world around them. Naomi Brooks walked at a slower pace than everyone else, balancing 2 bags of groceries in one hand while holding an umbrella over an elderly woman she had just helped across a busy intersection. She never considered kindness an extraordinary act. It was simply the quiet rhythm of her everyday life. After making sure the older woman reached her apartment safely, Naomi continued toward the neighborhood bus stop. A sudden gust of wind pushed rainwater across the curb, and something small rolled from beneath a sleek black luxury sedan before coming to rest near her shoes. Curious, she bent down and picked it up. Resting in her palm was a heavy silver ring unlike anything she had ever seen. It carried the weight of years rather than fashion, polished smooth by constant wear instead of careful display. Along the inside of the band was an engraved family crest and a sentence whose letters had softened with time but remained clear enough to read. Honor outlives fortune. Naomi quietly repeated the words to herself before looking up. The black sedan had already disappeared into the stream of evening traffic. She glanced around the nearly empty street, expecting someone to come running back in search of the missing ring, but no one appeared. She slipped it carefully into the inside pocket of her coat, determined to protect it until she could find its owner. Across the city, Adrian Hayes stood inside the executive office of Hayes International overlooking a skyline glowing beneath gray clouds. People throughout New York admired his remarkable success while quietly whispering about the mystery surrounding his personal life. He had refused every invitation, every carefully arranged introduction, and every attempt to draw him into romance. Many believed arrogance explained his solitude. Very few understood that disappointment had built walls around his heart long before wealth ever surrounded him. As another business meeting came to an end, Adrian reached for his overcoat and instinctively touched the hand where a familiar silver ring had rested every day for nearly 20 years. His expression remained composed, yet his fingers froze. The ring was gone. Within minutes, security teams searched every hallway, conference room, elevator, and parking level Adrian had busy. The following morning, the rain had given way to clear skies, but the memory of the silver ring remained at the center of Naomi's thoughts. Before leaving for work, she carefully opened the small wooden box, making certain the ring had not been scratched or damaged during the night. She wrapped it in a soft handkerchief, placed it safely inside her handbag, and quietly promised herself that she would not return home until she had taken the first real step toward finding the rightful owner. Her mother noticed the unusual determination on Naomi's face and smiled gently. "Someone out there must be worried," she said. Naomi nodded. "If something carried that many years of memories, I would hope someone would do the same for me." After arriving at the neighborhood community center where she worked, Naomi finished helping children prepare for their after-school reading program before using her lunch break to continue her search. She visited several nearby businesses along the avenue where she had found the ring, asking receptionists, security officers, and store owners whether anyone had reported losing a distinctive silver ring engraved with a family crest. Every answer was the same. No one had heard anything. One jewelry store owner admired the craftsmanship and quietly estimated that the ring could be worth a remarkable amount of money. Another customer joked that most people would have sold it without thinking twice. Naomi only smiled politely before replying. Its value belongs to the person who has been searching for it. Meanwhile, inside Hayes International, Adrian Hayes remained unusually distracted despite a calendar filled with important meetings. Reports were presented, contracts were reviewed, and executives waited for his decisions. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the empty place on his hand where the silver ring had rested for nearly 2 decades. He had instructed his security team to expand their search beyond the office building, reviewing surveillance footage from every location he had visited during the previous afternoon. Hours of investigation produced nothing except one brief recording showing the ring slipping unnoticed from his finger as he entered his car before disappearing into the rain-covered street. Even with unlimited resources, some things simply refused to be found. Later that afternoon, Naomi borrowed a small magnifying glass from the community center's craft room and examined the engraving beneath better light. The family crest appeared more detailed than she had first realized, surrounded by elegant initials and the familiar words, "Honor outlives fortune." Curious, she searched public business records using the crest as her only clue. After several minutes, an article about Hayes International appeared on the screen beside a photograph of its founder and chief executive, Adrian Hayes. The family emblem displayed in the article matched the engraving perfectly. Naomi quietly read the brief profile, describing Adrian as one of the city's most respected yet most private business leaders. The article mentioned his commitment to discipline and his refusal to seek public attention outside professional matters, but it said nothing about the significance of the ring. That did not matter. Naomi had finally found the owner. She called the main office of Hayes International and calmly explained that she believed she had recovered an item belonging to Mr. Hayes. The receptionist listened carefully before asking Naomi to describe only the family crest rather than the entire ring. Moments later, the call was transferred to the executive security office, where another calm voice confirmed several details known only to the owner. After a brief silence, the representative thanked Naomi for her honesty and respectfully asked whether she would be willing to visit Hayes International the following morning. Naomi accepted without hesitation, ended the call, and carefully returned the silver ring to its wooden box. She believed she was simply preparing to return a treasured possession, never imagining that the meeting awaiting her the next day would become the beginning of a story neither she nor Adrian could possibly foresee. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Hayes International carrying the same small wooden box that had protected the silver ring since the night she found it. The headquarters tower rose above the Manhattan skyline with quiet confidence, its polished glass reflecting the early sunlight, while employees moved through the lobby with calm purpose. Although the building represented extraordinary success, Naomi felt no intimidation. She had not come seeking an opportunity or a favor. She had come to complete a promise she had quietly made to herself the moment she picked the ring up from the rain-soaked sidewalk. After confirming her name at the reception desk, she was escorted by a courteous member of the executive security team to a private conference room overlooking the Hudson River. Fresh coffee rested on the table beside a vase of white lilies, and sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, filling the room with peaceful warmth. Naomi placed the wooden box carefully in front of her and waited with patient composure. A few moments later, the conference room door opened. Adrian Hayes entered alone, dressed in a dark charcoal suit that reflected the quiet discipline defining every part of his public life. His expression remained calm, yet his attention immediately settled on the small wooden box resting on the polished table. For a brief moment, the distance he usually maintained from everyone seemed to disappear behind genuine curiosity. Naomi stood politely and offered a respectful smile before gently sliding the wooden box toward him. "I believe this belongs to you," she said softly. Adrian opened the lid with remarkable care. The silver ring rested exactly as he remembered it, protected inside the folded cloth exactly as though it had never left his hand. He lifted it slowly and turned it beneath the morning light, allowing his fingers to follow the familiar family crest and the engraved words that had guided him since his father first entrusted him with the ring many years earlier. Without saying a word, he placed it back onto his finger, where it seemed to settle naturally as though returning home. Several quiet seconds passed before Adrian finally looked toward Naomi. "Most people would have accepted that it was too valuable to return," he said honestly. Naomi answered with the same calm sincerity that had guided every step of her search. "Its value was never mine to decide." Adrian studied her expression carefully. Years of experience had taught him to recognize hidden motives behind polished conversations, generous gestures, and carefully planned introductions. Yet he found none of those things reflected in Naomi's eyes. There was only quiet certainty that she had done what she believed was right. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Please accept this as my gratitude." Naomi looked at the envelope before gently pushing it back toward him. "Thank you, but I cannot." Adrian appeared genuinely surprised. "You spent your own time searching for me. You protected something that could never have been replaced. Why refuse?" Naomi smiled warmly. "Because if I expected payment for returning something that already belonged to you, I would not have been returning it for the right reason. Her answer settled over the room more powerfully than either of them expected. Adrian slowly withdrew the envelope without another attempt to persuade her. For the first time in many years, he found himself facing someone who neither feared his influence nor desired anything it could provide. Before Naomi turned toward the door, Adrian quietly asked one final question. "May I know your name?" She paused and looked back with a gentle smile. "Naomi Brooks." Adrian repeated the name silently as she disappeared into the hallway, realizing that although the silver ring had found its way back onto his hand, something far less tangible had quietly returned with it. A stranger had restored not only a treasured family heirloom, but also the first fragile reason he had discovered in years to believe that genuine honesty still existed beyond the walls he had built around his heart. After Naomi left Hayes International, the conference room remained silent long after the door had closed behind her. Adrian stood alone beside the table, absent-mindedly turning the silver ring around his finger as sunlight reflected across its worn surface. For years he had carried it every day without allowing himself to think too deeply about the promise engraved inside. Now, after watching a complete stranger protect it with greater care than many people protected their own possessions, the familiar words seemed to carry new meaning. Honor outlives fortune. They were no longer simply his father's advice. They had become something he had just witnessed with his own eyes. Returning to his private office, Adrian unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and removed an old photograph that few people had ever seen. It showed a much younger Adrian standing beside his father on a quiet autumn afternoon outside their family home. Both of them smiled naturally, untouched by the burdens that would later shape Adrian's life. He remembered the day the photograph had been taken almost perfectly. Before handing over the silver ring, his father had placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "There will come a time when people admire what you own more than who you are. If that day ever arrives, let this remind you that your character must always remain more valuable than your success." Adrian carefully returned the photograph to the drawer, realizing that somewhere along the road to becoming powerful, he had protected his reputation far more carefully than the promise attached to the ring itself. That afternoon, curiosity quietly replaced suspicion. Rather than ordering another background investigation, Adrian simply asked his executive assistant one respectful question. "Tell me about Naomi Brooks." The information that arrived surprised him more than any financial report ever had. Naomi worked full-time at a neighborhood community center while caring for her elderly mother every evening. She volunteered additional hours organizing literacy programs for children, delivering groceries to homebound senior citizens, and helping families complete paperwork for local assistance programs. She had accepted no public awards despite being nominated several times by members of her community. According to everyone interviewed, she avoided attention whenever possible because she believed kindness became less meaningful the moment it was performed for recognition. Adrian listened quietly without interrupting. Nothing in the report suggested ambition, manipulation, or hidden motives. It described a woman whose ordinary days were filled with extraordinary consistency. As evening approached, Adrian instructed his driver to take a different route home. Without announcing himself or leaving the vehicle, he asked to stop near the community center. Through the window, he watched Naomi kneel beside a frightened little girl, patiently helping her repair the torn cover of a favorite library book instead of replacing it. Moments later, she laughed warmly with an elderly veteran while carrying 2 heavy grocery bags to his apartment building. No cameras followed her. No speeches praised her. She behaved exactly the same when no one appeared to be watching. Adrian remained inside the car, unexpectedly moved by the quiet simplicity unfolding before him. For years, he had convinced himself that genuine kindness always expected something in return. Yet the woman outside had returned a priceless family heirloom, refused every reward, and continued living exactly as she always had, completely unaware that someone whose life she had already changed was now silently learning from the example she never intended to set. As the driver slowly pulled away from the curb, Adrian rested his hand upon the silver ring once again and looked back until the community center disappeared behind the evening traffic, wondering whether the strongest hearts were not the ones that never trusted, but the ones courageous enough to remain kind in a world that so often rewarded the opposite. Over the next several weeks, Adrian found himself making a quiet change to a routine that had remained untouched for years. Instead of ending every day with another business dinner or another late meeting inside the glass walls of Hayes International, he occasionally asked his driver to take a longer route home. The destination never appeared on his calendar, and no one inside his company questioned the change. The black sedan simply passed the community center where Naomi spent most of her afternoons serving others with the same steady kindness that had first returned a silver ring to its rightful owner. Adrian never interrupted her work. He never announced his presence. He simply observed from a respectful distance, discovering that the honesty she had shown him had never been a single remarkable moment. It was the pattern of her entire life. One afternoon, she patiently helped children prepare for a neighborhood reading contest. Another day, she stayed long after closing to organize donated food for families facing difficult times. On another evening, she carried grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs for an elderly couple before quietly walking away without waiting for their gratitude. Every small act reflected the same principle that had brought the silver ring safely back into Adrian's hands. She expected nothing in return. That realization remained with Adrian even after he returned to his office. Several days later, his charitable foundation delivered its quarterly list of organizations requesting financial assistance. Normally, those reports passed through multiple committees before reaching his desk. This time, Adrian noticed one familiar name almost immediately. The neighborhood community center where Naomi worked had applied for funding to repair its aging roof, replace worn classroom furniture, expand literacy programs, and provide transportation for senior citizens who struggled to attend medical appointments. The request was modest compared with the foundation's annual budget, yet Adrian refused to approve it automatically. He wanted every decision to be fair. He instructed an independent review team to evaluate the organization exactly as they would evaluate any other applicant, without mentioning Naomi or revealing his personal interest. 2 weeks later, the report returned with exceptionally positive findings. The center consistently delivered outstanding results. Despite operating with limited resources, careful budgeting, and hundreds of volunteer hours, Adrian approved the entire grant without changing a single recommendation. He added only one condition: the donation would remain completely anonymous. His foundation director looked surprised. Most major donors preferred public recognition through plaques, ceremonies, or press releases. Adrian simply replied, "If people receive the help they need, they should never feel obligated to remember the person who made it possible." Construction began the following month. The leaking roof was repaired before the next heavy rain arrived. Bright new books filled empty shelves. Reliable transportation allowed dozens of elderly residents to attend important medical appointments without worrying about expensive taxi fares. During a staff meeting, the community center director announced that an anonymous benefactor had chosen to invest in the future of the entire neighborhood. Volunteers applauded with joyful relief, while Naomi smiled alongside everyone else, believing that somewhere in the city another generous heart had quietly decided to care about people they would probably never meet. She never suspected Adrian's involvement because she had never measured kindness by the name attached to it. Across town, Adrian received photographs showing children reading beneath the repaired roof and families gathering inside newly restored classrooms. He studied the images for several quiet moments before placing them inside the same desk drawer that held his father's photograph. The silver ring rested comfortably on his hand as he realized something that no business achievement had ever taught him. Wealth could build impressive buildings, but only integrity could inspire a person to use it wisely. And without realizing it, Naomi had already given him a lesson more valuable than any fortune he had ever earned. Life at the community center settled into a brighter rhythm after the anonymous donation transformed classrooms that had struggled for years with leaking ceilings and worn equipment. Children filled the halls with laughter, senior citizens arrived safely for weekly programs, and volunteers found renewed energy knowing their work could now reach even more families. Naomi celebrated every improvement alongside her co-workers, never once wondering who had made it possible. She believed that generosity did not become more meaningful because a famous name stood behind it. To her, the results mattered far more than the recognition. Across the city, Adrian quietly continued his daily responsibilities, but the photographs from the community center remained inside the top drawer of his desk beside the picture of his father. Whenever another difficult negotiation or exhausting meeting threatened to convince him that selfishness defined the world, he found himself looking at those images instead. They reminded him that somewhere beyond conference rooms and financial reports, ordinary people still chose kindness without expecting applause. One afternoon, Adrian's chief legal advisor entered his office with an unexpected concern. An outside consulting firm had approached several nonprofit organizations connected to the Hayes Foundation, offering generous partnership agreements in exchange for confidential information about future charitable investments. The proposal appeared professional, but the legal department suspected that the company hoped to influence upcoming foundation decisions for its own financial advantage. Among the organizations contacted was Naomi's community center. Adrian listened quietly before asking a single question. "Has anyone responded?" The advisor explained that most organizations had requested time to consider the offer. Adrian nodded thoughtfully, but gave no further instructions. He believed every person deserved the opportunity to make the right choice without interference. 2 days later, Naomi received an invitation to meet representatives from the consulting firm at a neighborhood cafe. The conversation began politely enough. The visitors praised the recent improvements at the community center and complimented Naomi's reputation for honesty and leadership. After several minutes, one representative carefully slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposed consulting agreement that offered a generous payment in exchange for sharing information about the anonymous donor and any future financial support the center might receive. Naomi read every page carefully before closing the folder. She looked at both representatives with calm respect rather than anger. "I cannot help you," she said gently. One of them smiled and explained that no laws would be broken because the agreement had been prepared by experienced attorneys. Naomi quietly shook her head. Whether something is legal and whether something is right are not always the same thing. The representative reminded her that the payment could improve her own life and help care for her mother. Naomi answered with the same peaceful certainty that had guided her since finding the silver ring. If kindness was given freely, it deserves to be protected freely. She stood, thanked them for their time, and walked away without looking back. Later that evening, Adrian received a brief report confirming every detail of the meeting. He remained silent for several moments before placing the document inside the drawer beside the photographs from the community center. Nothing in the report surprised him anymore. Naomi had simply remained the same person she had always been. Yet for Adrian, that consistency carried extraordinary weight. In a world where loyalty was often measured by convenience and honesty sometimes disappeared when money appeared, Naomi had once again chosen integrity without knowing anyone was watching. As Adrian rested his hand upon the silver ring, he realized that trust was no longer something he believed had vanished from the world. It had simply been waiting for someone brave enough to remind him that true character could never be purchased at any price. Several days passed after the consulting firm quietly disappeared from the community center, leaving behind nothing except the memory of a conversation Naomi had already placed behind her. She returned to her familiar routine without expecting recognition for the decision she had made. Every morning began with organizing books for the children's reading program, checking on elderly residents who visited the center for companionship, and helping volunteers prepare meals for families facing difficult weeks. To Naomi, integrity was not something reserved for extraordinary moments. It was a habit practiced through ordinary choices long before anyone noticed them. Across Manhattan, Adrian found himself thinking about that simple truth more often than he expected. The report describing Naomi's refusal remained inside his desk drawer, untouched, yet unforgettable. He had spent years believing trust was dangerous because it always carried the possibility of disappointment. Yet every quiet observation of Naomi challenged that belief without asking him to abandon caution completely. She had never tried to impress him, never reminded him that she had returned his father's ring, and never attempted to benefit from knowing who he was. She simply continued living according to the same principles whether anyone watched or not. One Friday afternoon, Adrian made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of observing from a distance, he called the community center directly and asked whether Naomi would have time to meet him the following morning. When she accepted with polite curiosity, Adrian suggested a small public garden overlooking the Hudson River, far removed from executive offices and formal conference rooms. The next morning arrived beneath a clear blue sky, filled with the gentle warmth of early spring. Families strolled through blooming flower gardens while children laughed beside a small fountain, creating the kind of peaceful setting Adrian had not visited in many years. Naomi arrived carrying nothing more than a canvas bag filled with library books she planned to return afterward. Adrian stood waiting beneath a flowering dogwood tree, dressed simply enough that most people passing nearby paid him no special attention. For the first few minutes, they spoke about ordinary things. Naomi shared stories about the children at the community center discovering new favorite books. Adrian admitted that he rarely found time to enjoy quiet places like the one surrounding them. The conversation flowed naturally, free from business or obligation. Eventually, Adrian looked toward the river before speaking more softly than Naomi had ever heard him. "People often ask why I keep everyone at a distance," he said. "Most believe success made me cold. The truth is almost the opposite." He paused for several moments before continuing. "After my father passed away, I trusted people who cared more about my position than my character. Every betrayal became another reason to close another door. Eventually, I convinced myself that loneliness was safer than disappointment." Naomi listened without interrupting. She did not rush to comfort him or argue with his experiences. She simply allowed the silence to exist until Adrian finished speaking. Finally, she smiled gently and said, "When someone hurts us, it becomes easy to believe everyone will eventually do the same. But sometimes protecting our hearts too completely also prevents the right people from ever reaching them." Adrian looked at her with thoughtful surprise. Her words carried no judgment, only quiet understanding. For the first time in many years, he realized he had spoken honestly about his past without feeling the need to defend himself afterward. As they slowly walked along the riverside path, the silver ring caught the afternoon sunlight resting comfortably on Adrian's hand. It no longer reminded him only of promises made to his father. It now reminded him that healing often begins with one sincere conversation, one unexpected act of kindness, and one stranger willing to prove that trust, once lost, can still find its way home. The peaceful conversation beside the Hudson River lingered in Adrian's thoughts long after he returned to his office. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt like a shield protecting him from disappointment. Instead, it felt like space where something long forgotten had quietly begun to grow. Every business decision that followed remained as disciplined as before, yet the people closest to him noticed subtle changes they could not explain. Adrian listened more carefully during meetings, encouraged younger executives to share ideas without fear, and ended conversations with genuine gratitude instead of simple efficiency. None of those changes were dramatic, but together they reflected a man whose heart had begun opening in ways even he did not fully understand. Naomi continued living exactly as she always had. She never spoke about meeting Adrian in the garden, never mentioned the silver ring to anyone, and never imagined that her ordinary choices had reshaped another person's life. Each day she arrived at the community center before sunrise, arranging books across classroom shelves, preparing activities for children, and greeting every visitor with the same quiet warmth. To her, every person deserved respect before they earned admiration. One Saturday afternoon, the community center organized a neighborhood appreciation event celebrating the volunteers whose efforts had helped transform the building during the previous months. Families gathered beneath colorful banners while children painted murals, musicians performed familiar songs, and elderly residents shared homemade meals with neighbors. Naomi spent most of the afternoon making sure everyone else felt welcome, barely noticing Adrian as he quietly entered the courtyard dressed in a simple navy jacket instead of his usual business attire. There were no photographers following him and no formal announcement marking his arrival. He had come as one person thanking another. After the celebration settled into a peaceful rhythm, Adrian asked Naomi if she would join him for a short walk through the newly restored community garden behind the building. Flowering tulips swayed gently beneath the afternoon breeze while fresh herbs filled the air with a calming fragrance. Reaching a quiet wooden bench, Adrian slowly removed the silver ring from his hand and held it carefully in his open palm. The familiar engraving caught the sunlight exactly as it had the morning Naomi first returned it. He looked toward her with calm sincerity. "This ring has carried my father's promise for many years," he said softly. "After meeting you, it also carries my gratitude. I want you to have it." Naomi looked at the ring without reaching for it. Her expression reflected neither surprise nor temptation, only thoughtful understanding. After a long moment, she gently closed Adrian's hand around the silver band. "Your father trusted you with that promise," she replied quietly. "Returning it once was enough for me. Keeping it belongs only to you." Adrian searched her face, wondering if she understood what the gesture truly meant. Naomi smiled with the same peaceful confidence he had first seen inside the conference room at Hayes International. "Objects become meaningful because of the promises we choose to honor. If you gave me this ring, it would no longer remind you of the man your father hoped you would become. It should remain with the person still living that promise every day." Her words settled gently between them as birds drifted through the clear spring sky overhead. Adrian slowly placed the ring back onto his finger, but this time its familiar weight felt different. It no longer represented loss, regret, or loneliness. It represented trust restored through honesty, kindness proven through ordinary actions, and the quiet strength of one remarkable stranger who never realized that the greatest gift she returned had never been made of silver at all. Several months passed, and summer sunlight filled the streets of New York with a warmth that seemed to reach even the quietest corners of the city. Life continued moving forward for everyone who had crossed paths because of one forgotten silver ring. Yet the greatest changes remained the ones no newspaper could ever report. Hayes International continued growing, but employees gradually discovered that their chairman now measured success by more than quarterly reports and expanding investments. Community partnerships increased, educational programs received lasting support, and charitable projects quietly flourished without carrying Adrian Hayes' name. Whenever executives suggested public recognition for the foundation's generosity, Adrian simply declined with a peaceful smile. He had finally understood that kindness became most powerful when it expected nothing in return. Naomi noticed only the results. More children filled the classrooms with confidence, more elderly neighbors found reliable transportation, and more struggling families discovered opportunities that had once seemed impossible. She never searched for the identity of the anonymous donor because gratitude did not require knowing a name. Every morning, she continued unlocking the doors of the community center before sunrise, arranging books on the shelves, preparing activities for the children, and greeting every visitor with the same gentle kindness that had always guided her life. Nothing about her character changed after meeting Adrian, because genuine goodness had never depended upon extraordinary circumstances. One quiet afternoon, Adrian visited the community center once again, not as a businessman and not as a benefactor, but simply as a friend. Together, he and Naomi walked through the small garden where flowers had fully bloomed beneath the summer sky. Children laughed nearby while elderly neighbors relaxed on shaded benches, creating the kind of ordinary happiness Adrian had once believed no longer existed. He looked down at the silver ring resting comfortably on his hand before speaking with quiet gratitude. "For many years, I believed this ring was the last gift my father left me," he admitted. "Now I understand that it became the reason I found something else I thought had disappeared forever." Naomi looked at him with the same calm expression she had carried since the day she returned the ring. "Sometimes," she answered softly, "people do not lose hope because life is unkind. They lose hope because they stop believing kindness still exists." Adrian smiled, recognizing the truth inside her words. He realized that the ring had never changed. The promise engraved within it had never changed either. The only thing that had changed was the man who carried it. As the afternoon slowly faded into evening, families began returning home while golden sunlight settled across the garden paths. Adrian and Naomi remained standing beneath the quiet trees, watching children wave goodbye with carefree laughter. There were no dramatic declarations, no extraordinary celebrations, and no promises that needed to be spoken aloud. Their friendship had been built through honesty instead of expectation, through respect instead of obligation, and through everyday choices that quietly proved character always mattered more than circumstance. When Adrian finally turned to leave, he paused for one last look at the community center that had unknowingly become the place where his life had found a new direction. The silver ring reflected the final rays of sunlight as he walked away with steady confidence, no longer carrying it as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a symbol of everything he had found again. And in a city filled with millions of strangers, one simple act of honesty had quietly reminded two ordinary people that the greatest treasures are never measured by wealth or power, but by the courage to protect another person's hope when no one else is watching.